Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and finding a decent job meant either leaving for the city or settling for whatever local work you could get. I chose to stay. After high school, I managed to land an apprenticeship with a painting company. It was hard work, early mornings, long days covered in paint splatters, but I stuck with it. 4 years of learning the trade, following my mentor around job sites, absorbing everything I could about proper technique and dealing with difficult clients. Finally, after all that time, I got my journeyman letter. That piece of paper meant I was no longer just a kid who fetched supplies and cleaned brushes. I was a qualified painter, someone with skills and certification to back it up. The company I worked for was small, maybe a dozen employees total. My boss ran everything with an iron fist and had this habit of making decisions that benefited him while pretending they were good for everyone else. He loved showing off his authority, reminding people that he called the shots. Most of us just kept our heads down and did our work, trying not to get on his bad side. One afternoon, not long after I got my letter, my boss called me into his office. He was sitting behind his desk with this smug expression, the kind that immediately made me suspicious. He leaned back in his chair and announced the company had purchased a new vehicle. My first thought was relief. Our old work vans were falling apart and desperately needed replacing. He told me it was going to be a pool car, but he wanted me to use it whenever no one else needed it. I tried not to show how excited I was. Getting access to a company car this early in my career was unusual. Most people had to wait years before they got that privilege, but then I started thinking about the logistics. How was I supposed to use it if it stayed at the company overnight? I asked him if he would drive me to work the next day so I could take the car home then. He said no, it was a pool car that had to be parked on company ground during nights. There it was, the catch. He was dangling something nice in front of me but making it essentially worthless. A pool car I could only use during work hours but had to pick up from the company lot every morning. That meant if I wanted to use it for job sites, I would have to get to the company first, which defeated the entire purpose. I nodded like I understood and left his office. I walked back to my workspace and started thinking about how this was going to work. My job required traveling to different locations every day, sometimes an hour away from the company lot. We had set work hours, 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. If I had to be at a job site by 7 and the site was an hour away, that meant leaving the company lot by 6. Which meant getting to the company even earlier to pick up the car. But my boss had been very clear. The car stayed on company property at night. Fine, I would follow his rules exactly. The next week I showed up at the company at 7 in the morning. I grabbed the keys to the pool car and drove to the job site. Of course, I arrived late. The other workers were already setting up and I could see the frustration on the foreman's face. But what could I do? I was following the boss's instructions to the letter. At 4:30 that afternoon, I packed up my equipment, got in the pool car, and drove back to the company. I parked it, locked it up, and went home. This became my routine. Every single day. 7 in the morning, pick up the car. 4:30 in the afternoon, return it. By the end of the week, my boss was furious. On Friday afternoon, he called me into his office again. His face was red, his jaw clenched. He looked like he was about to explode. He told me he was writing me up for not showing up to work on time. According to him, I had to follow the 8-hour workday rule. I had to be at the job site at 7 and leave at 4. No exceptions. I kept my expression neutral. I knew the union rules inside and out. I had studied them when I first started my apprenticeship, making sure I understood my rights and protections. I told him he was right and that I would start leaving the car at 4 instead of 4:30. He looked confused and said no, that I was supposed to be at the work site at 7 and leave by 4. I explained that I drove a pool car and according to the union rules, a pool car was supposed to leave company ground at 7 and be parked by 4. Those were the rules, and I had to follow them. I watched as realization dawned on his face. He had backed himself into a corner with his own rules. The union regulations were crystal clear about pool vehicles. They were supposed to be stored at company property and only used during official work hours. If he wanted me to use the car to get to job sites on time, he would have to let me take it home. But he had explicitly said the car had to stay on company grounds at night. His mouth opened and closed a few times. He looked like he wanted to argue but could not find the words. Finally, he said he would pick me up the next day at 6:15. I nodded and left his office, fighting to keep the smile off my face until I was safely out of view. The next morning, he showed up at my house at exactly 6:15. I climbed into his fancy personal car, and we drove to the company in complete silence. About 10 minutes into the drive, he finally spoke. He said he had been trying to do me a favor with that car, a favor that required me to waste hours of unpaid time every day and consistently arrive late to job sites. I asked him how it was a favor. He explained that most journeymen did not get access to a company car this early, and he thought I would appreciate the opportunity. I told him I did appreciate opportunities, especially ones that did not require me to break union rules or work unpaid hours. I could hear his breathing get heavier. He was trying to control his temper. He said the union rules were just guidelines and sometimes we needed to be flexible for the good of the company. And there it was, the real reason behind all of this. He wanted me to ignore the protections the union had fought for, to work extra hours without compensation, all for the good of his company. I told him the union rules were there to protect workers like me. If we started bending them, where would we draw the line? He had no answer. We finished the drive in silence. When we got to the company, I started to get out, but he stopped me. He said we should make a deal. I could take the car home, but he expected me to be at the job sites by 7 in the morning sharp. No exceptions. And now this was interesting. He was offering exactly what I had wanted from the beginning, but I was not about to let him think he was doing me some huge favor. I asked him what about the overtime for the extra driving I would be doing outside of work hours. His expression looked like he had bitten into something rotten. He said fine, we would log the extra time as overtime, but he expected top-notch work from me. I assured him that I always took pride in my work. I got out and headed to the pool car feeling pretty good about how things had turned out. For the next few weeks, everything ran smoothly. I took the car home, arrived at job sites on time, and logged my overtime for the extra driving. My boss would glare at me occasionally, but he could not complain because I was following our agreement perfectly. Then, about a month later, he called me into his office again. I could tell by his expression he thought he had found a brilliant solution to his overtime problem. He said they had been reviewing expenses and the overtime from my driving was really adding up. They needed to make some changes. Of course, I should have known he could not leave well enough alone. I asked what kind of changes he had in mind. He said they were thinking of implementing a new policy where all employees who took company vehicles home would be responsible for their own gas for personal use. I waited a moment before responding, making sure I understood what he was suggesting. I asked if personal use meant weekends and after-hours trips, not the driving to and from work sites. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair and said they considered the drive from my home to the first job site of the day as personal use. I took a deep breath. We were really doing this again. I told him I did not think that aligned with our union agreement. The drive to the first job site was considered work time, especially since I was in a company vehicle. His face started turning red again, that familiar color I had come to recognize. He said the union agreement was open to interpretation and they were just trying to manage resources efficiently. I was getting tired of this constant battle, but I was not about to back down. I told him I understood he was trying to manage resources, but changing the interpretation of our agreement without consulting the union could cause problems. Maybe we should invite a union representative to discuss this new policy. The moment I mentioned the union representative, his face went pale. He knew he was on shaky ground trying to reinterpret a clear agreement to save money. He said that would not be necessary and they would review the policy again before implementing any changes. I left his office knowing this was not over, but each time he tried to take advantage, I would be ready with the union rules and regulations. He could keep trying to find loopholes, but I had spent my apprenticeship learning not just how to paint, but how to protect myself from bosses who thought rules did not apply to them. I spent 15 years working as a financial analyst before the accident. Long hours, tight deadlines. But I loved the challenge. My husband and I bought our house in this neighborhood 7 years ago, right after we got married. We were the youngest couple on the block back then. Everyone was friendly enough, and we settled into a comfortable routine. Weekends were for yard work and neighborhood barbecues. Weekday evenings meant unwinding on the porch with a glass of wine. Then everything changed one night in March. I was driving home late from the office. The project deadline had us all working overtime. I remember thinking about what to make for dinner, maybe ordering takeout instead. Then headlights were coming straight at me in my lane. The impact happened so fast, I didn't even have time to scream. I woke up 3 days later in intensive care. My husband was sitting beside the bed, his eyes red and exhausted. He tried to smile when he saw me awake, but I could see the devastation in his face. That's when the doctor came in and explained everything. The drunk driver had walked away with minor injuries. I would never walk again. The first month home was the darkest period of my life. I refused visitors. I barely ate. My husband took family leave from work to help me adjust, but I resented needing help with everything. Getting dressed, using the bathroom, moving from room to room. Every simple task felt like climbing a mountain. The neighborhood association kept sending cards and flowers. My husband went to the monthly meetings alone, coming back each time with well wishes from everyone. He tried to convince me to come with him, but I couldn't face anyone. I didn't want their pity or their awkward attempts at being supportive, but staying isolated was eating me alive. After 2 months of hiding, I decided I needed to try. When my husband suggested the next meeting, I agreed to go. Most neighbors were genuinely kind when we arrived. They asked how I was doing, careful not to stare at the wheelchair. A few people seemed uncomfortable but covered it with extra friendliness. Then there was this woman on the board who had always been difficult. She complained about everything from lawn heights to paint colors. She glared at me from across the room but didn't approach. Over the next few weeks, I kept noticing her hostile looks. At the grocery store, she'd see me in an aisle and turn around. At the park where my husband took me for fresh air, she'd deliberately look away. My husband said to ignore her, that she wasn't worth the energy. The confrontation came at the following meeting. We'd barely entered the room when she walked over. She told me I shouldn't come to these meetings anymore. She said disabled people made her uncomfortable. She claimed it didn't look good for the neighborhood to have me out in public spaces all the time. She insisted I would drive away new home buyers. I sat there frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. My husband exploded immediately. He asked her how she dared say such things. He told her I had every right to be here. He said her comfort didn't trump my rights as a homeowner and human being. Other neighbors started yelling at her too, defending me, calling her out. We left early because I was shaking and crying. I spent the rest of the night sobbing in our bedroom, but something shifted in me over the next few days. I realized that hiding away would mean letting her win. This was my home too. I had every legal and moral right to participate in my community. So I insisted on attending the next meeting. When she saw me wheel through the door, her face went purple. She told me she'd already said I should never show my face here again. She called me selfish. She claimed she had every right to call security and have me removed right now. I told her to go ahead and try it. I dared her to do it. She actually did it. She stomped to the phone and called security. My heart pounded when we waited. My husband looked ready to physically block anyone who tried to remove me. The security guard walked in looking confused. She immediately started screeching. She demanded that I be removed immediately. She said she'd already told me I wasn't welcome at the meetings. The guard asked what exactly I had done wrong. She said I was in a wheelchair. She explained again that disabled people made her uncomfortable and looked bad for the neighborhood. The guard's expression changed completely. He turned to her with clear disgust. He told her he would not be part of illegally discriminating against someone with a disability. He said I had done nothing wrong and had every right to be here. He suggested she drop this immediately. Her face turned crimson when other neighbors voiced their support for me. She was practically vibrating with rage. Then she grabbed a cup of water from the table and threw it directly in my face. Cold water soaked through my shirt. The room went completely silent. Then my husband slapped her hard across the face. She stumbled backwards and crashed to the floor. She sat there holding her cheek, looking stunned. Then she started shrieking and tried to lunge at my husband. The guard had to physically restrain her while someone called the police. When the officers arrived, everyone gave statements about what had happened. They asked if we wanted to press charges. We said yes immediately. When they handcuffed her, she was still screaming. She yelled that they couldn't do this to her. She said she was on the board. She claimed that my husband had assaulted her. The officer told her she was under arrest for assault and violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. He read her the Miranda rights while she continued screaming. We watched them put her in the patrol car. My husband knelt beside my wheelchair. He asked if I was okay. He apologized for everything. He acknowledged he shouldn't have hit her, but he explained he couldn't stand by and watch her treat me that way anymore. I told him it was okay. I said I was all right and I thanked him for standing up for me. The legal process took weeks. We met with prosecutors and gave detailed statements. She ended up taking a plea deal for assault, harassment, and disability rights violations. The sentence included community service, a fine, and mandatory sensitivity training. The board removed her from her position and sent us a formal apology. At the next meeting, the president made a public statement. He said they wanted to sincerely apologize for the inexcusable treatment I had received. He said that this kind of discrimination had no place in the community. He promised they were committed to making the neighborhood welcoming and accessible for all residents. It took time before I felt comfortable attending meetings again, but slowly, with support from my husband and neighbors, I got more involved. We joined a committee working on accessibility improvements throughout the neighborhood. She moved away a few months later. I heard the legal issues and social backlash made staying impossible. These days, I attend every meeting and neighborhood event I can, not just for myself but for anyone else who might feel unwelcome. I want them to see they belong here too. Living with a disability is hard. There are bad days and constant challenges, but I refuse to let people like her make me feel less worthy or push me out of public spaces. This is my home and my community. I have just as much right to be here as anyone else. I've been working as an industrial painter for years now. I paint machinery, equipment, all kinds of industrial stuff. Most days are straightforward. Client tells me what they need painted, what color they want, and usually what type of paint to use. I show up, prep the surface, do my job, and move on to the next one. I started in this field right after high school. My uncle owned a painting company and needed help, so I figured why not. Turned out I had a knack for it. Over the years, I learned everything there is to know about different types of paint, what works on what surfaces, how to prep different materials. It's more complicated than people think. About a month ago, I got a job that should have been routine but turned into a complete nightmare because my boss refused to listen to basic sense. My boss is this woman I'll call Karen. She's been running the company for about 5 years, ever since she bought it from the previous owner. The thing about Karen is that she thinks because she owns the business, she automatically knows everything about painting. Spoiler alert, she doesn't. So I get this work order for a carbon steel job. Standard stuff, except when I looked at the specifications, my stomach dropped. The client wanted us to use water-based paint on carbon steel. Anyone who knows anything about painting metal knows this is a terrible idea. Water-based paint on carbon steel is asking for rust. It's like painting a target on the metal and saying, please corrode here. The water in the paint reacts with the steel, especially when it's exposed to air, and you get oxidation, rust, destruction of your nice expensive machinery. I walked straight to Karen's office. She was at her desk, clicking away on her computer, probably looking at finances or something. I asked if she had a minute. She said sure, and asked what was up. I told her it was about this new job. I explained that they wanted us to use water-based paint on carbon steel. She asked, and I told her that wasn't going to work. I explained that the paint will make the steel rust. She didn't even look up from her screen. She said she didn't care. She told me to just use the paint. She added that they were going to be here next week. I blinked. Did she seriously just say that? I tried to explain that she didn't understand. I told her this was going to ruin the job. She said to look, we don't have time for this. She told me to just do what the client wants. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what was happening. I've dealt with stubborn people before, but this was ridiculous. The client clearly didn't know what they were asking for, and it was our job to guide them toward the right solution. I said, all right, if that's what she wanted. But I asked if she could write down the paint I was supposed to use and sign it. She finally looked at me, annoyed. She said, fine, if it'll make me do my job. She grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled down the instructions. Water-based paint, carbon steel substrate, the whole doomed recipe. Then she signed it and shoved it across the desk at me. I took that paper and folded it carefully into my pocket. I had a feeling I was going to need it. The next day I started prep work. It took me the entire day to get everything ready. Cleaning, sanding, making sure the surface was perfect for painting. The whole time I kept thinking about how this was all going to fail. Then I painted it. I used the water-based paint exactly how she told me, watching myself apply a coating that I knew was going to fail. It felt wrong, like deliberately sabotaging the job, but I had my orders in writing. When I finished, I left it to dry and cure for a couple of days. During that time, I just waited. I knew what was coming. Sure enough, about a week later, Karen came storming into my work area. Her face was bright red and she looked furious. She asked what I did. She said the job looked horrible. She yelled that there was rust showing through the metal. I set down my equipment and turned to face her. I've been preparing for this conversation all week. I told her I followed her instructions to the letter. I reminded her that I told her again and again that water and air will make metal rust. She asked how this could happen. She said we've never had this problem before. I explained that's because we've never used water-based paint on carbon steel before. I told her it's basic chemistry. She tried to pin the whole thing on me. Said I must have prepped wrong, must have applied it wrong, must have done something to cause this. But I stood my ground. I pulled out that signed paper from my pocket and showed it to her. I pointed out right here. I showed her signature. I showed her instructions. I told her I did exactly what she told me to do. We argued for what felt like forever. She kept trying to find some way to make this my fault, but the evidence was right there in black and white. Finally, her shoulders sagged. She said, okay, fine. She admitted she was wrong. She asked how we fix this. I'll admit, hearing her say she was wrong felt pretty good. I told her the best option is to sandblast it. I explained we need to get all the paint off and then use an oil-based paint. I said enamel would be best. She said that sounds expensive and time-consuming. I agreed it is. But I told her it's the only way to fix this mess and give the client a product that won't fall apart on them. She sighed hard. She said, all right, she'll get me the sand I need. She told me to just make sure this doesn't happen again. I said, trust me, it won't. I added long, she listens to me when I say something won't work. The next day I started sandblasting. For those who don't know, sandblasting is shooting sand at extremely high speeds to strip everything off the surface. It's loud, dirty, exhausting work. You're wearing protective gear, the noise is deafening, and you're covered in dust and debris by the end of it. I was in the middle of blasting when Karen showed up to check on things. She looked shocked at the state of the machinery. She asked if all this was really necessary. I said, yep. I explained we need to get every bit of that water-based paint and rust off before we can start over. She asked how long this was going to take. I told her probably a couple of days for the sandblasting. I added that then we need to let it dry completely before we can start painting again. She said the client is not going to be happy about this delay. I told her, well, they're going to be a lot less happy if their machinery rusts through in a few months. She nodded slowly. She said she'll handle the client. She told me to just focus on fixing this. For the next few days, I worked non-stop, sandblasting every inch of that machinery, cleaning it thoroughly, prepping it properly for the new paint job. My arms ached, my back hurt, but I knew it had to be done right this time. Finally, the machinery was ready. This time I used oil-based enamel paint. It creates a hard, durable finish that protects metal from rust and corrosion. You know, like paint is supposed to do. When I was putting the finishing touches on it, Karen came by again. She looked at the machinery, then at me. She said it looked really good. I told her that's because we're doing it the right way this time. She was quiet for a moment. She said listen. She wanted to apologize. She admitted she should have listened to me from the beginning. I nearly dropped my brush. Karen, apologizing? I thanked her and said I appreciated that. I added that just remember, next time I say something won't work. She said, I know. She told me I'll listen. She admitted I'm the expert here. Things changed after that. Karen started actually consulting me on jobs, especially when clients made unusual requests. She even started sending other painters to me when they had questions about tricky projects. The client loved the final result. They had no idea about the disaster that happened behind the scenes, and honestly, that's how it should be. They got a quality paint job that will last for years. Now, whenever there's a question about paint types or application methods, Karen asks me first. No more ignoring basic science. No more dismissing expert advice because of deadlines or client pressure. In this line of work, you can't cut corners. Rust doesn't care about your schedule or your budget. It'll happen if you don't take the right precautions. Simple like that. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.